This 4-year-old homeless girl finds a millionaire being forced to drink poison, but she appears from behind and does something that shocks everyone. You won't believe how this story ends. Watch until the end. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream ripped through the docklands like a tear in the silent pre-dawn. The 4-year-old girl jolted awake inside the cardboard box she called home, behind the rusty shipping containers that formed a labyrinth of metal and abandonment. Her small fists clenched instinctively, her heart pounding as she tried to identify the origin of that desperate sound that cut through the humid March air. She knew every sound of the docklands. 2 years living among the empty warehouses, sleeping in dark corners, and scavenging food scraps from the warehouse dumpsters had sharpened her senses for survival. She could differentiate the rumble of the loaders from the heavy footsteps of the night watchman. She knew the sound of rats scurrying through the pipes and the groan of the metal structures swaying in the wind coming off the harbor. But that human voice, choked with terror and pleading, was something new and disturbing. The girl crawled out of the box, her bare feet touching the cold concrete. The oversized local soccer team t-shirt, 3 times too big for her frail body, slipped off her skinny shoulders as she walked cautiously between the piles of abandoned containers. Her tangled hair fell over large eyes that had learned to see in the dark, a skill developed out of necessity when you're an invisible child in a world that doesn't care about the small and lost. The sound came from a disused warehouse at the end of the yard, a structure from the 70s with corroded tin walls and broken windows that reflected the faint light of distant streetlights. The girl approached slowly, each step calculated not to make a sound. The streets had taught her that curiosity could be fatal, but something stronger than self-preservation pulled her towards that place. Through a crack in the side wall, she managed to peek inside the warehouse. 3 masked men surrounded a figure in the center of the empty space. The victim was tied to a wooden chair, his head hanging forward at an angle that suggested unconsciousness or extreme exhaustion. He was a young man, appearing to be just over 30, with expensive clothes that contrasted grotesquely with the dilapidated environment around him. "Wake up, rich kid," one of the kidnappers growled, his hoarse voice cutting through the silence. "The party's not over yet." The man in the chair lifted his head with difficulty, revealing a bruised but still handsome face, with features reminiscent of the matinee idols from movies that the girl sometimes managed to watch through the windows of houses when no one was looking. His blue eyes, even clouded by pain and confusion, retained a spark of determination that contrasted with the vulnerability of his situation. "Please," he murmured, his voice hoarse with desperation. "I have money. I can pay any amount you want. My company is worth hundreds of millions. I can transfer Bitcoin, stock options, anything." One of the men held up a bottle of cheap vodka, the clear liquid glinting under the yellowish light of a single bulb that hung from the ceiling. "It's not about money, boss. It's about you exiting the scene permanently." The girl watched in horror as they forced the bottle against the man's lips. The liquid dripped down his chin as he tried to resist, choking and coughing. She could see the terror in his eyes, the same expression of helplessness she saw in the cracked mirror of the public restroom when she remembered her time at the foster home. "Drink it all, pretty boy," ordered another kidnapper. "It'll be easier this way. An alcohol overdose mixed with some other goodies we brought. The papers will say it was just another stressed-out businessman who couldn't handle the pressure." The girl's heart was beating so hard she feared they could hear it. She knew she should leave, run away, and forget what she had seen. The streets had taught her that survival meant absolute selfishness, never getting involved in other people's problems, never drawing attention to yourself. But something inside her, a spark of humanity that even the worst moments couldn't completely extinguish, refused to let that man die. Before she could think about the consequences, before reason could contain the impulse, the girl opened her mouth and screamed with all the force her small lungs could produce. "Help! Someone's hurting someone here! Help!" The effect was immediate and chaotic. The three men turned towards the sound, their masks failing to hide their surprise and panic. The man in the chair took advantage of the momentary distraction to spit out the liquid that was still in his mouth, while the girl continued screaming, her voice echoing through the empty warehouses like a desperate alarm. "What the hell was that?" one of the kidnappers growled. "A damned kid," replied another, already heading towards the side exit of the warehouse. "Let's get out of here now!" The girl heard heavy footsteps approaching and ran, her bare feet hammering the concrete as she snaked between the containers. Behind her, she could hear the men arguing in panic, their voices fading towards the canal that cut through the docklands. It was then that she saw the light of a flashlight and the silhouette of a police officer making his night rounds. The patrolman came running, drawn by the screams, and found the girl hiding behind a container, trembling not from cold, but from a mixture of terror and adrenaline that she couldn't understand. "What's going on here, little one?" asked the officer, his gentle voice contrasting with the authority of his uniform. The girl pointed towards the warehouse, her words tumbling over each other. "There's a man there. They were hurting him, making him drink something." The patrolman ran in the direction indicated, finding the man still tied to the chair, conscious but clearly traumatized. The kidnappers had fled, leaving behind only the evidence of their interrupted crime and a child whose inexplicable courage had changed the course of everything. 3 months had passed since that night in the warehouse, but for the 30-year-old businessman, each day seemed like an eternity of silent torment. Sitting in his Italian leather chair on the 12th floor of the city's most modern corporate building, he looked out the panoramic window without being able to concentrate on the numbers that danced on the computer screen in front of him. His technology and artificial intelligence company had become one of the most promising in the country, with assets valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Investors competed for his shares on the stock exchange, and his portfolio of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies grew exponentially every quarter. At 30, he had accumulated a fortune that most people couldn't spend in several lifetimes, but all that financial success seemed insignificant compared to the weight he carried in his chest. The office door opened, and his secretary entered with a stack of documents that needed his signature. $1 million contracts, investment agreements, dividend and profit reports that would normally fill him with satisfaction. But when she placed the papers on the solid mahogany desk, his hands began to tremble uncontrollably. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, noticing the sweat that was beginning to form on his forehead, despite the air conditioning being kept at a perfect temperature. He tried to answer, but the words were lost in his throat. Suddenly, the luxurious office transformed into the cold, damp warehouse. The smell of imported premium coffee was replaced by the acrid odor of rust and mold. The Italian meeting table became the chair where he had been tied, and the bitter taste of that liquid, forced down his throat, returned with an intensity that made him gag. I can't breathe," he managed to murmur, before everything darkened around him. When he woke up, he was in the most expensive private hospital in the city, surrounded by monitors that emitted constant beeps. A woman in a white coat, with graying hair and gentle eyes, was by his bed making notes on a clipboard. "I'm the psychiatrist who will be taking care of your case," she said in a calm voice. "You had a severe panic attack. Your secretary told us about the episode in the office. He tried to sit up, but the dizziness made him give up. I need to get back to work. I have an important meeting with Japanese investors interested in our technological assets. Sir, you need to understand that what happened wasn't just a moment of stress. You developed panic disorder as a consequence of the trauma you experienced. Your brain is trying to process an experience that almost resulted in your departure from this world." In the following weeks, his routine became a personal hell. The crises came without warning, always at the most inopportune moments. During a presentation to American investors interested in buying part of his shares, he had to run out of the room when someone spilled water, and the sound of the liquid made him relive those terrible moments. A meeting to discuss the expansion of his cryptocurrency business had to be cancelled when he fainted upon seeing a bottle of water on the table. The shareholders began to whisper in the corridors. His administrative council scheduled meetings to discuss his condition and the need to protect investments. Corporate clients who had previously competed for his services began to question his stability and competence to lead a company of such importance in the technology market. "You need to find the child," said the psychiatrist during one of her weekly sessions. "Part of your recovery may be linked to giving meaning to what happened, to transforming that traumatic experience into something that has meaning." "How am I going to find a homeless girl? I don't even know if she's still alive," he replied, running his hands over his face. "Hire someone. You have enough resources for that." That's how he met the private investigator, an ex-cop who worked in a modest office in the historic center of the port city. The man had a rough appearance but intelligent eyes, and his decades of experience dealing with difficult cases were evident in the way he asked precise questions and noted every detail. "4-year-old girl, living in the docklands for at least 2 years," repeated the investigator, studying the few available pieces of information. "It's not going to be easy. Street children appear and disappear like ghosts. Many don't trust adults, especially men." "How much will it cost?" asked the businessman, taking out his checkbook. "It's not about money, it's about time and patience. I can charge by the day, but I don't guarantee quick results." The days dragged on in a search that seemed impossible. The investigator scoured alleys, talked to homeless people, checked temporary shelters and food distribution points. Meanwhile, the businessman tried to keep his company running between bouts of anxiety that left him prostrate for hours. It was on a rainy dawn in June that the investigator finally found her. She was sleeping in a cardboard box behind the municipal market, wearing the same soccer team t-shirt she had on that fateful night. She seemed even smaller and more fragile than the businessman imagined, with arms as thin as sticks and large eyes that carried a sadness too profound for someone so young. "It's her," confirmed the investigator over the phone. "But, sir, you need to know that this girl isn't just an abandoned child. She's a survivor, and survivors don't trust easily." When the businessman arrived at the municipal market, he found the girl awake, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. She recognized him immediately, the man in the chair, the one who almost left this world that terrible night. "You're the man they were hurting," she said in a small but clear voice. "Yes, and you're the girl who saved me." She was silent for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to decipher his intentions. "Why did you look for me?" The simple question carried a weight he didn't expect. How to explain to a 4-year-old child that finding her was the only way he could imagine giving meaning to the trauma he was living through? How to say that his nightmares lessened when he thought of the inexplicable courage she had demonstrated that night? "Because," he said finally, kneeling down to be at her height, "you did something that no one else would do, and I want to repay you." "Repay how?" "By giving you a better life, a home, food every day, school, clean clothes, a family." The girl looked at him with those big, wise eyes, processing an offer that seemed too good to be true. In the docklands, she had learned that adults only made promises when they wanted something in return. "And what are you going to want from me?" she asked, demonstrating a disturbing maturity for her age. The question hit him like a punch. Was he being selfish? Did he want to adopt her out of genuine altruism, or just to alleviate his own guilt and trauma? "Nothing," he replied, surprising himself with the honesty of the answer. "I just want you to be a normal child who has the chance to be happy." But as he spoke those words, a shadow moved in the back of the market. Someone had been watching the entire conversation. someone who wouldn't be satisfied to see him find peace and stability again. The first steps of the adoption process proved more complex than the businessman had imagined. Sitting in the office of the lawyer specializing in family law, he leafed through piles of documents that seemed to multiply with each visit. The 50-year-old woman, with gold-rimmed glasses and an impeccable suit, patiently explained each legal requirement while the girl played silently in the corner of the room with some toys he had bought. "The process can take up to a year," said the lawyer, organizing the papers on the glass table. "Especially considering that this is a child who lived on the streets and that you have no previous family ties. The court will want guarantees that you are prepared to be a father." "I have enough financial resources to give her everything she needs," he replied, adjusting the Italian tie that cost more than many families earned in a month. "It's not just about money, sir. They will assess your emotional stability, your routine, your psychological conditions to raise a child who certainly carries deep trauma." The word trauma echoed in the office like an uncomfortable echo. He looked at the girl, who had stopped playing and was watching them with those big, attentive eyes. She seemed smaller than her 4 years, as if life on the streets had stolen not only her childhood, but also her physical growth. "I'll do whatever is necessary," he said, determined. That same afternoon, he took her to see the most renowned private school in the coastal region. The modern building contrasted with the abandoned warehouses where she had spent the last 2 years. Well-kept gardens, rooms with state-of-the-art equipment, teachers trained at the best universities in the country. The principal, an elegant woman with blonde hair tied in a perfect bun, greeted them in her office decorated with diplomas and educational awards. "It will be a pleasure to have the little one with us," she said, smiling at the girl who was hiding behind the businessman's legs. "She'll need special attention," he explained. "She's been through difficult experiences and may have adaptation difficulties. We have a team of educational psychologists prepared for cases like this," assured the principal. "Children are resilient. With love and patience, she will integrate perfectly." But when the girl was introduced to her first class, reality proved to be very different from the optimistic expectations. Sitting at a desk too small for someone used to sleeping in cardboard boxes, she watched the other children with a mixture of fascination and terror. When a 4-year-old boy approached offering a colorful toy, she recoiled instinctively, knocking over the chair and running to the corner of the room. "Don't touch me!" she shouted, shrinking against the wall. "Don't touch me!" The teacher tried to approach slowly, speaking in a soft tone, but the girl went into complete panic. She began to scream and struggle when someone tried to touch her, reliving memories of hands that hurt her in the past. The other children were scared, some started to cry, and in a few minutes the room turned into chaos. The businessman was urgently called to the school. When he arrived, he found the girl locked in the bathroom, refusing to come out. He managed to convince her only by whispering through the door that he was there to take her away. "Maybe it's better to start with private lessons at home," suggested the principal, her expression now less confident, "until she gets used to the presence of other people." That night, in his luxurious penthouse overlooking the sea, he watched the girl draw obsessively in a notebook. All the drawings were done with black crayon and depicted the same scene: a dark warehouse, 3 menacing figures, and a small child hiding behind boxes. It was as if she needed to reproduce that moment repeatedly to try to understand it. "Why did you scream at school today?" he asked, sitting down next to her on the leather sofa. "They wanted to touch me," she replied without looking up from the drawing. "On the street, when someone wants to touch you, it's because they're going to hurt you. But those were other children. They just wanted to play." "How do you know?" she asked, finally looking at him. "You've never lived on the street." The simple question carried a brutal truth that he didn't know how to refute. How to explain trust to someone who has learned that survival depended on suspecting everyone. A few days later, During a consultation with the child psychologist specializing in trauma, he began to understand the magnitude of the challenge he had taken on. The professional, a middle-aged woman with a gentle voice and infinite patience, explained while the girl played with modeling clay in a corner of the cozy office. She has developed very sophisticated defense mechanisms for a 4-year-old, said the psychologist. Hypervigilance, extreme distrust, fight or flight reactions when she feels threatened. These are normal responses for someone who needed to survive alone. How long will it take for her to get better? It's not a question of getting better, it's a question of learning to trust again, and that can take years. You need to be prepared for relapses, for difficult moments, for slow progress. As they talked, the girl had stopped playing and was watching them closely. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to read facial expressions and body language, a survival skill that allowed her to identify dangers before they materialized. "Is he going to give me back to the street?" she asked directly to the psychologist. "Why do you think that?" "Because all adults do that when they find out I'm too difficult." The businessman felt his heart tighten. "No one is going to give you back to anywhere," he said, kneeling in front of her. "No matter how difficult it is, we're going to make it." But even as he made that promise, he felt his own anxiety crises intensifying. The responsibilities of caring for a traumatized child, combined with the pressure of keeping his company running and his investments earning millions, were taking a heavy toll. His panic attacks became more frequent, especially when the girl had her own episodes. It was during one of those simultaneous crises, when both were on the floor of the living room, crying for different reasons, that the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at 9 at night. Through the intercom, a female voice identified herself as a social worker from the juvenile court. "I need to make a verification visit," said the woman when he opened the door. "We have received some concerns about the conditions of the child." "What kind of concerns?" he asked, trying to disguise his nervousness. "The school reported serious behavioral incidents. There are questions about your own emotional stability to care for a child in a vulnerable situation." The social worker entered and began to take notes on everything. The luxurious decor that could intimidate a child accustomed to poverty, the absence of appropriate toys scattered around the house, the evident tension between him and the girl. "Where does she sleep?" asked the woman. "I prepared a special room for her," he said, guiding her down the hall. The room was a work of art of children's decoration. Pink walls, white solid wood furniture, a bed with a canopy that seemed straight out of a fairy tale, shelves full of expensive toys still in their original packaging. "Very elaborate," commented the social worker, taking more notes. When they returned to the living room, they found the girl exactly where they had left her, motionless in the corner of the sofa, watching everything with her big, vigilant eyes. "How are you feeling here?" asked the social worker, crouching in front of her. The girl looked at the businessman, then at the unfamiliar woman, carefully processing her response. "I'm okay," she said finally, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty. After the social worker left, he sat next to the girl on the couch. "Do you think I'm doing everything wrong?" he asked. "You're trying," she replied, surprising him with the maturity of her answer. "But I don't think you know how to take care of a kid who isn't normal." "You are normal. I'm not. And that's okay. We just need to figure out how to work together." That night, he stayed up late thinking about her words. Maybe the problem wasn't trying to turn her into a normal child, but learning to navigate the unique world she had created to survive. But while he was trying to find answers, he didn't know that someone very close was actively working to ensure that this adoption never materialized. The 45-year-old woman watched from the window of her mansion as the businessman's car drove away along the coastal avenue. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed nervously against the glass, a habit she had developed whenever something threatened her carefully laid plans. The news of the adoption had reached her through whispered conversations at the city's most exclusive country club, where the wives of the wealthiest men gathered to share gossip disguised as social concern. She had married the textile industry magnate at 28, not out of love, but out of a meticulously planned strategy that involved months studying his habits, his preferences, and most importantly, the size of his fortune. When he passed away 5 years later, a victim of a sudden heart attack during a business meeting, she inherited a fortune estimated at $80 million, including shares in various companies and an investment portfolio that guaranteed monthly dividends exceeding what most people earned in an entire year. But there was a snag in her long-term plans. The 30-year-old stepson, with his expanding tech company and his seemingly infinite ability to multiply money through investments in Bitcoin and the stock market. While she maintained the inherited wealth, he was creating new wealth at a rate that threatened to make him more powerful than she could control. The adoption of that homeless girl represented a risk she wasn't willing to accept. A direct heir, even if adopted, could receive a significant portion of the assets she considered rightfully hers. Even worse, a traumatized child could awaken the stepson's protective and emotional side, making him less easily manipulated. She picked up the phone and dialed the number of the most expensive and efficient lawyer in the region, a man known for winning impossible cases through strategies that bordered on the ethical limits of the profession. "I need you to contest an adoption," she said, without preamble when he answered. "What kind of contest are you thinking of?" "My stepson is trying to adopt a street child. He has diagnosed panic disorder, frequent anxiety attacks that affect his work. He's not psychologically capable of raising a child, especially one who already comes with behavioral problems. That could be complicated. If he has financial resources and is following all the legal protocols." "Find a way," she interrupted, her voice taking on an icy tone. "My fees will compensate for any extra effort needed." While she was articulating her first move against the adoption, on the other side of the city, the businessman was trying to create a routine that worked for both of them. He had hired a nanny specializing in children with special needs, a 60-year-old woman with infinite patience and decades of experience dealing with difficult cases. "She doesn't sleep at night," reported the nanny during a morning conversation in the penthouse kitchen. "She stays awake, listening to all the noises, as if expecting some danger. And when she manages to fall asleep, she has nightmares that make her scream." The businessman looked through the ajar door of the girl's room, where she was sitting on the floor drawing with crayons. Even after 2 weeks of living in the penthouse, she refused to use the canopy bed, preferring to sleep in a corner of the room with blankets arranged like a kind of protective nest. "What can we do?" he asked. "Time and consistency. She needs to learn that this is a safe place, but that doesn't happen overnight." That afternoon, during one of the weekly visits to the child psychologist, the professional made an observation that left him worried. "She's bonding with you, which is positive," said the psychologist, while the girl played with building blocks in a corner of the office. "But she's also developing a dependence that could be problematic. She only feels safe when you're around." "Isn't that normal? For a child who has lived abandoned, it's understandable. But it can become limiting. She needs to learn to trust other people too." As if she had heard the conversation, the girl dropped the toys and approached him, holding his hand with surprising strength for someone so small. "You're not going away, are you?" she asked, her large eyes fixed on his face. "I'm not going away," he replied, but he could feel the weight of responsibility in his words. It was in the following week that the first bomb exploded. The stepmother's lawyer had filed a petition in court requesting the temporary suspension of the adoption process, alleging that the businessman did not have adequate psychological conditions to care for a child in a vulnerable situation. "They have medical reports proving your panic attacks," explained his lawyer during an emergency meeting, and reports from the school about the girl's behavioral episodes. They're building a case that you two are too unstable to form a functional family. That's ridiculous, he protested. We're making progress. She's getting better. I know that, but they have solid legal arguments. We're going to have to fight. That night, he had to explain to the girl why men in suits were asking questions about her at school, why social workers appeared without warning for checkups, why she might have to talk to a judge. "Are they going to take me away?" she asked, huddled on the living room sofa. "I'm not going to let that happen," he promised, but his own anxiety was growing. "But maybe you have to be very brave and tell some people about how you feel here." "I like staying here," she said simply. "You don't hurt me." The simplicity of the response hit him like a punch. For her, the bar for a good life was just not being hurt. It was then that the second bomb exploded. The social worker responsible for the case appeared at his company during a particularly stressful day when he was trying to control a crisis in the cryptocurrency markets that had cost millions in net worth. "I need to inform you about a complication in the process," she said, sitting in the chair in front of his office desk. "What kind of complication?" "Another couple is interested in adopting the girl. They've been in the system for a long time, waiting for a child in her age range. The world seemed to stop around him." "What do you mean, another couple?" "A teacher and a professor, both with experience in early childhood education. They have a suitable apartment, a stable financial situation, and most importantly, no history of psychological problems. From a legal point of view, they may be considered more suitable. But she's been with me for almost a month. She's adapting. That can be argued in court, but the system prioritizes what's best for the child, not the bonds that have already been formed." When the social worker left, he was alone in his office, looking out the window at the city that stretched below. His company was worth hundreds of millions. His investments generated profits that would allow him to buy anything he wanted. But none of that mattered if he lost the only person who had given real meaning to his life after the trauma. That night, the girl noticed his sadness before he even said anything. "You're sad like I used to be on the street," she observed, climbing onto the sofa next to him. "Sometimes adults get sad too," he said. "Is it because of me?" The direct question forced him to be honest. "Some people think I don't know how to take good care of you." "But you do," she said, with the absolute confidence that only children possess. "You give me food every day. You don't yell at me, and you don't let anyone hurt me. What if those people manage to take you to live with other people?" "I'll run away," she replied immediately. "I know how to run away very well." The determination in her small voice at the same time reassured and worried him. She had survived on the streets for 2 years through that same determination, but he didn't want her to have to use those skills again. "It won't be necessary to run away," he promised. "We're going to fight to stay together." But as he made that promise, he didn't know that the stepmother had already taken the next step in her campaign. She had hired a private investigator to look for compromising information about the girl's past, anything that could be used to argue that she was too problematic to be adopted by someone with emotional instability. What none of them expected was that this investigation would reveal much deeper secrets about the night of the kidnapping, secrets that would completely change the course of everything. The teacher couple who had entered the dispute for adoption lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, decorated with simple but welcoming furniture. Their shelves were filled with children's books and teaching materials accumulated during decades of work with children. Both in their 40s, they had tried to have biological children for more than 10 years before accepting that fate had chosen a different path for them. "We've been in the system for 7 months," explained the woman to the social worker during an evaluation visit. "We've gone through all the preparatory courses, the psychological evaluations, the home visits. We were waiting for a child exactly her age." Her husband, a gentleman with a greying beard who taught math to elementary school children, showed the room they had prepared. It was small compared to the princess room in the businessman's penthouse, but every detail had been carefully thought out. Walls painted in soft yellow, a small bed with stuffed animals, shelves with educational games, and a desk where a child could do homework. "We know she has trauma," he said. "We have experience dealing with children in difficult situations. At school, we always receive the most complicated cases because they know we have patience." The social worker took notes while observing the house. There was a palpable stability there, a structured routine that could be exactly what a traumatized child needed. Without panic attacks from an adoptive father, without the pressure of adapting to a millionaire lifestyle she didn't understand. Meanwhile, in the luxurious penthouse, the businessman desperately tried to create moments of normalcy with the girl. He had cancelled important meetings, postponed business trips, and even delegated decisions about million-dollar investments to his subordinates, something he had never done before. "Want to learn how to make cookies?" he asked on a Tuesday afternoon, looking at simple recipes on the tablet. The girl, who was drawing her eternal dark warehouses, raised her eyes with curiosity. "Real cookies?" "Real ones. With chocolate." She left the crayon aside and approached the counter of the gourmet kitchen, equipped with appliances that cost more than a subcompact car. Her small hands could barely hold the wooden spoon, but she concentrated intensely on each movement, as if it were the most important task in the world. "On the street, I sometimes smelled cookies when I passed near the houses," she said, while stirring the dough, "but I never knew how they were made." "Now you know," he said, smiling for the first time in days. When the cookies were ready, they sat on the balcony overlooking the sea, eating and watching the ships on the horizon. It was a moment of peace that the businessman tried to burn into his memory, knowing that he might not have many others like it. "If I have to go away," said the girl suddenly, "are you going to forget me?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you think you're going to have to go away?" "Because that's what always happens. People get tired of taking care of me." "I'm never going to get tired of you," he promised. "You saved me that night. Now it's my turn to save you." But as they were having that conversation, the stepmother's lawyer was meeting with the judge responsible for the case. The magistrate, a serious woman in her 50s with decades of experience in family law, listened carefully to the arguments presented. "Your Honor," said the lawyer, spreading medical reports on the table, "my client has documented severe panic disorder. He's had episodes in business meetings that have resulted in hospitalizations. How can someone in that state adequately care for a child who also has serious psychological problems?" "And what is your suggestion?" asked the judge. "That custody be transferred to the teacher couple who are already qualified in the system. Stable people with professional experience in early childhood education, with no history of mental disorders." The judge studied the documents carefully. From a legal point of view, the arguments were solid. The well-being of the child should be the top priority, above any sentimental considerations about bonds already formed. "I'm going to schedule a hearing for next week," she decided. "I want to hear all the parties involved, including the child herself." When the news of the hearing reached the businessman, his anxiety reached critical levels. He had to take medication to be able to sleep, and even then he woke up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, reliving not only the trauma of the kidnapping, but also the new nightmare of losing the girl. "You need to prepare for the possibility that the decision won't be favorable," said his lawyer during a preparatory meeting. "Their arguments are technically correct. You have documented mental health issues." "But she's happy with me," he protested. "She's progressing." "That may not be enough." That night he found the girl awake in her room, sitting on the floor looking out the window. "Why aren't you sleeping?" he asked. "I'm seeing if someone is coming to get me," she replied with brutal honesty. "No one is going to get you without me knowing." On the street, sometimes people came during the night. They said they were going to take me to a better place, but I always ran away. You don't need to run away from me." "I know," she said, looking at him with those big eyes. "But maybe I need to run away from the people who want to take me away from you." The determination in her small voice at the same time made him proud and broke his heart. She was willing to fight to stay with him, but that meant she would have to face more trauma, more instability. It was then that the private investigator hired by the stepmother made a discovery that would completely change the game. Rummaging through old records from the foster home from which the girl had fled, he found information that no one expected. The girl hadn't simply fled because of general mistreatment. She had fled specifically from an abuse situation that was being investigated internally by the institution. Even more shocking, the records indicated that she had witnessed something that could compromise powerful people connected to the foster home. "This changes everything," said the investigator to the stepmother during a nighttime call. "If this information becomes public, it could create a scandal that goes far beyond the adoption issue." "What do you mean?" "The girl may have information about things that certain people would prefer to keep buried, people with a lot of money and influence." The stepmother realized that she had discovered something much bigger than she imagined. If she could use this information properly, she could not only prevent the adoption, but also gain influence over very powerful people. But what she didn't know was that the girl had developed an extraordinary memory during her years of survival on the streets, and that this memory held secrets about the night of the kidnapping that no one imagined a 4-year-old could have retained. While the adults played their games of power and manipulation, the girl slept restlessly in the penthouse, dreaming not only of the warehouse where she saved the businessman, but also of other night scenes that her mind had filed away as a protective mechanism. Scenes that, when revealed, would show that the businessman's kidnapping had not been a random crime, but part of a much more complex conspiracy that involved people too close to be a coincidence. The hearing took place on a grey August morning in the city courthouse, an imposing building of classical architecture that intimidated anyone who entered through its heavy doors. The businessman adjusted his tie for the 5th time as he waited outside the courtroom, his anxiety manifesting itself through small tremors in his hands that he tried to disguise. The girl was sitting next to him, wearing a blue dress that the nanny had chosen especially for the occasion. Even so, she looked tiny in the adult chair, her feet swinging a few inches above the floor. She watched everything around her with those big, alert eyes, cataloguing each person, each movement, each sound that could represent danger. "Remember what we talked about?" he whispered to her. "The lady is going to ask you some questions, and you just need to tell the truth." "What if they don't like the truth?" she asked with a disturbing maturity for her 4 years. "The truth is always better than lies." Across the hall, the teacher couple waited nervously. They had brought a folder with photos of the school where they worked, statements from colleagues about their dedication to children, and letters of recommendation from educational authorities. The woman constantly adjusted her hair, while the husband mentally reviewed the points he wanted to highlight during his speech. "We are the most sensible choice," she murmured to her husband. Any impartial person would see that. When the doors opened, everyone entered the courtroom. The judge, a woman of severe appearance but kind eyes, took her place behind the elevated desk. The stepmother's lawyer was present, as well as the businessman's lawyer and a representative from the district attorney's office. "We are here to determine what is in the best interest of the minor," began the judge, her voice echoing through the formal room. "I will hear all parties, but I want to make it clear that my decision will be based exclusively on the well-being of the child." The stepmother's lawyer stood up first, presenting his argument with the precision of a surgeon. He cited the businessman's medical reports about his panic attacks, documented episodes of emotional instability that had affected his ability to work properly. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing dramatically, "how can a man who needs medication to attend business meetings offer the stability that a traumatized child needs?" His anxiety attacks are so severe that they have already resulted in hospitalizations. What kind of environment does that represent for a minor who has already experienced enough trauma? Then he presented the teacher couple's profile as the ideal solution. Stable people with professional experience in early childhood education, organized finances without the pressures of managing millionaire estates, a structured routine perfect for a child in recovery. When it was the businessman's lawyer's turn, she took a different approach. Instead of trying to deny her client's mental health problems, she contextualized them. "Your Honor," she began, "my client developed panic disorder as a direct result of the trauma he suffered. And who saved him from that trauma? This girl. There is a connection between them that goes far beyond legal documents. She represents for him the possibility of healing, just as he represents for her the security she has never had." She then presented reports from the child psychologist showing the girl's progress in recent weeks, photographs of the routine they had established together, statements from the nanny about how the child had begun to trust and open up emotionally. "Furthermore," continued the lawyer, "we need to consider the resources that my client can offer. Education at the best private school in the region, access to the best medical and psychological treatments, opportunities that a middle-class family, however well-intentioned, simply cannot provide." Throughout this discussion, the girl remained silent, watching the adults decide her future as if she were an object to be redistributed. But when the judge addressed her directly, everyone in the room could see the sharp intelligence behind those big eyes. "Honey," said the judge in a gentle voice, "do you understand what's happening here?" "You are deciding where I'm going to live," replied the girl with brutal simplicity. "And do you have a preference?" The girl looked at the businessman, then at the teacher couple, finally back to the judge. "Can I ask a question?" "Of course." "If I go to live with them," she said, pointing to the teachers, "what's going to happen to him?" She pointed to the businessman. The question caught everyone off guard. The judge exchanged glances with the lawyers before answering. "He'll continue his life, honey. He'll take care of his company." "But he's going to be sad," said the girl with absolute certainty. "He gets sad when I'm not around, and I get sad too when he isn't." "Don't you think it would be better to have a real mum and dad?" asked the judge, gesturing towards the teachers. "He's my real dad," replied the girl. "Not because he made me, but because he chose me. And I chose him too." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the stepmother's lawyer seemed momentarily speechless in the face of the child's emotional clarity. It was then that something unexpected happened. The girl got up from the chair and walked to stand before the judge's desk. "Can I tell you something important?" she asked. "What is it, honey?" "The night I saved him, I saw more things." Everyone in the room leaned forward. The judge gestured for her to continue. "There was a man who wasn't wearing a mask," said the girl, her voice small but firm. "He was hiding, but I could see. He had a ring like the one he wears." She pointed to the businessman. The businessman felt his blood run cold. He instinctively looked at his right hand, where he wore the family ring with the hereditary crest. Only 3 people possessed identical rings. "Can you describe this man?" asked the judge, realizing that something very serious was being revealed. "He was taller than him," said the girl, comparing him to the businessman, "and he had darker hair. He spoke with the masked men, but not close to where he was tied up." The room exploded in murmurs. The businessman's lawyer immediately requested a suspension of the hearing, alleging that new criminal evidence had been presented and needed to be investigated before any custody decision was made. "Your Honor," she said, "if the girl witnessed aspects of the crime that were not previously reported, this completely changes the context of the situation. She may be the only witness to a larger conspiracy." The judge agreed to suspend the hearing for 2 weeks, determining that law enforcement authorities be notified of the new information. But she also ordered that the girl remain in temporary custody in a foster home until the situation was clarified. "No!" cried the girl when she understood that she would be separated from the businessman. "I want to stay with him." "It's temporary, honey," said the judge. "Just until we better understand what happened that night." As the social worker approached to take the girl, she clung to the businessman with desperate force. "You promised you wouldn't let anyone take me away," she cried. "I'm going to get you," he promised, trying to control his own tears. "No matter what happens, I'm going to get you." But as he made that promise, a terrible question echoed in his mind. If the girl had seen someone from the family during the kidnapping, that meant that the person who wanted to see him gone was much closer than he had ever imagined. And now, with the girl in state custody and criminal investigations being reopened, he would have to discover which member of his own family had tried to assassinate him, knowing that that same person now knew that there was a witness who could destroy them. The temporary foster home was in a quiet residential neighborhood, a one-story building painted light yellow with a small garden in front. It looked welcoming from the outside, but for the girl, it represented another separation, more proof that adults made promises they couldn't keep. She was greeted by a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a gentle smile, who tried to cheer her up by showing her the room she would share with 2 other children. The bed had a colorful blanket and stuffed animals arranged on the pillow, but the girl just sat on the edge and looked out the window, waiting to see the businessman's car arriving to pick her up. "He said he was going to pick me up," she murmured to the caregiver when asked if she needed anything. "I'm sure he's trying, honey." But sometimes adults need to solve complicated problems first. Meanwhile, the businessman was in his penthouse meeting with the private investigator, spreading old family photos on the coffee table. There were only 3 people who possessed the hereditary ring: himself, the stepmother, and his cousin, who worked as vice president of operations in his company. "The description she gave eliminates your stepmother," said the investigator, studying the photos. "Tall man, dark hair, taller than you. It can only be your cousin." The businessman got up and walked to the window, looking at the city that stretched below. His cousin had worked alongside him for more than 5 years, sharing decisions about million-dollar investments, company expansion strategies, even personal confidences about his relationship with his father before he passed away. "It doesn't make sense," he said finally. "Why would he do that? He has an excellent position in the company, receives substantial dividends from profits, has access to privileged information about our investments in Bitcoin and stocks. Maybe it's not about money," suggested the investigator. "Maybe it's about power. If you were to pass away, who would take control of the company?" The question hit the businessman like a punch. According to corporate documents, in his absence, his cousin would automatically be promoted to chief executive officer, inheriting not only the position, but also control over hundreds of millions in corporate assets. "Needs evidence," said the investigator. "The testimony of a 4-year-old may not be enough in court. We need concrete evidence." That night, the businessman couldn't sleep. He walked around the empty penthouse, feeling the girl's absence in every room. Her room remained exactly as she had left it, with drawings scattered on the small table and the nest of blankets in the corner where she preferred to sleep. The next morning he arrived at the company earlier than usual, even before his cousin arrived. Using his full access credentials to the system, he began to review financial records from the past few months, looking for any suspicious transaction or movement of funds that could be connected to the kidnapping. That's when he found something that made his blood run cold. Bank transfers totaling $2,400,000 had been made to an offshore account in the Caribbean islands 3 days before the kidnapping. The transfers were authorized with executive-level access credentials, but they did not have his digital signature. "Looking for something specific?" The cousin's voice behind him made him jump. The man was standing in the office doorway, wearing his impeccable Italian suit, but there was something different about his expression. A coldness that the businessman had never noticed before. "Just reviewing some quarterly reports," he lied, quickly closing the computer screen. "What dedication, working even with all these personal problems." The cousin approached the desk, his footsteps muffled by the Persian carpet. "I heard you lost custody of the girl. It's temporary." "Of course it is." The cousin smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Although, frankly, maybe it's better this way. A traumatized child, you with panic disorder. It didn't seem like a very stable combination." There was something about the way he said that made the businessman realize that he was facing a stranger. The man he had known for years, whom he trusted with decisions about millions in investments, had transformed into something cold and calculating. "She's coming home," said the businessman, keeping his voice firm. "If you say so." The cousin headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. "By the way, I've scheduled a board meeting for tomorrow. Some investors are concerned about your stability to continue leading the company. Maybe it's time to consider a temporary transition of power." After the cousin left, the businessman was alone in his office, processing what he had just heard. It wasn't just a veiled threat. It was a coup being executed in real time. While he was struggling to get the girl back, his own company was being taken from his hands. He called the investigator immediately. "Need to speed up the investigation. He's trying to take control of the company now. I'm already working on it." "But I found something interesting. His stepmother was also involved." "What do you mean?" "The transfers you found. Part of that money went to an account in her name. But here's where it gets interesting. She was also being manipulated. She only received a fraction of the total amount." The businessman began to understand the true magnitude of the conspiracy. His cousin had used the stepmother as a distraction, allowing her to believe she was orchestrating the coup while he controlled the true strings of the operation. That afternoon, he visited the girl at the foster home. She ran to hug him as soon as she saw him, clinging to him as if she feared he would disappear again. "You took a long time," she said, her voice choked. "I'm trying to solve some problems so you can come home." "What kind of problems?" He hesitated, trying to find appropriate words to explain family betrayal to a 4-year-old child. "Remember the man you saw that night? The man without a mask?" "I remember." "I need you to tell me everything you remember about him, every detail." The girl concentrated, closing her eyes as she did when she tried to remember important things. He was away from the other men. He spoke quietly on the phone, and... She paused as if accessing a difficult memory. "He said a name." "What name?" "Helena." He said, "Helena." "It's done on the phone." The businessman felt as if he had been electrocuted. The stepmother's name was Helena. That confirmed that she was involved, but also that she was receiving orders, not giving them. "Anything else?" "He had a watch that shone in the dark. And when he left, he got into a dark car that was hidden behind the containers." This information was crucial. The businessman knew that his cousin was obsessed with expensive watches and drove an imported black sedan. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but he needed evidence that would withstand legal scrutiny. "You're very brave," he said, hugging the girl. "And very smart. When can I go home?" "Soon. Very soon." But as he made that promise, he knew that time was a luxury he didn't have. The board meeting the next day could result in his removal as president of the company. And if he lost control of the company, he would also lose the financial resources needed to fight for custody of the girl. That night, back in the empty penthouse, he made a desperate decision. If his cousin wanted to play dirty, he had to be prepared to do the same. He picked up the phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in years. "Hello, police station. I need to report information about a crime. I have a witness who can identify one of those responsible for the kidnapping that happened 3 months ago in the Docklands." It was a dangerous game that was beginning, But the girl's life and his own future depended on him being able to prove that the person he trusted most was exactly who most wanted to see him gone. The detective in charge of the case was a 50-year-old man with a tired appearance and eyes that had seen too many crimes during his career. He received the businessman in his office crowded with lawsuits, where piles of documents accumulated on a scratched metal table that contrasted sharply with the luxurious furnishings to which the visitor was accustomed. "So you're telling me that your own witness, a 4-year-old child, can identify one of those responsible for your kidnapping?" asked the detective, making notes in a worn notebook. "She has an exceptional memory," explained the businessman. "She developed this ability to survive on the streets. She can reproduce entire conversations, describe details that adults usually wouldn't notice. And you believe that this man is your cousin, vice president of your company. I have financial evidence that supports that theory. Unauthorized transfers by me, suspicious bank movements 3 days before the crime." The detective sighed, recognizing the complexity of the case. Accusations against millionaire executives required irrefutable evidence, especially when they came from childhood testimonies and family conflicts that could be interpreted as personal motivations. "I'm going to need to formally interrogate the child," he said. "But you understand that this can be traumatic for her? She's already been traumatized. What matters now is discovering the truth." While that conversation was taking place at the police station at the foster home, the girl was having nightmares more intense than ever. She woke up screaming in the middle of the night, reliving not only the scene of the warehouse, but also confusing fragments of other memories that her mind had filed away as a protective mechanism. The caregiver of the house, a woman experienced in dealing with traumatized children, began to notice patterns in the girl's nighttime deliria. She spoke about familiar voices, about the man without a mask talking to someone she knew, about pieces of conversation that made more sense than typical ramblings. "She always repeats the same phrases," reported the caregiver to the social worker during a morning call. "It's like she's playing a recording. She talks about numbers, about money, about making it look like an accident." This information reached the detective on the same day he was preparing to interrogate the girl. Realizing that he might be dealing with a witness much more valuable than he had initially imagined, he decided to conduct the interrogation with extreme care in the presence of a psychologist specializing in childhood testimonies. The interrogation took place in a special room at the police station, decorated to look less intimidating. Toys scattered on the floor, walls painted in soft colors, small chairs suitable for children. The girl entered, accompanied by the social worker, her large eyes observing every detail of the new environment. "Hi, honey," said the psychologist in a gentle voice. "My name is Dr. Sandra. We just want to talk a little bit about that night you helped a man in danger." The girl sat in the small chair, swinging her feet that didn't reach the floor. "Can I see him later?" "See who, honey?" "The man I helped. He said he was going to pick me up." "Maybe yes, if you help us understand what happened that night." During the next hour, the girl reproduced the scene of the kidnapping with a precision that impressed even the most experienced professionals. She described the exact position of each person in the warehouse, the smell of rust and dampness, the sounds of the chains swaying in the wind coming from the sea. "The man without a mask was talking on the phone," she said, concentrating intensely. "He said, 'Helena, it's done. But there's a problem. The kid saw. And then, don't worry, no one is going to believe a street urchin.'" The silence that followed was heavy. The psychologist exchanged glances with the detective, both realizing that they were hearing details that a child wouldn't invent. "Anything else, he said?" asked Dr. Sandra. "He talked about money. He said that the 2,400,000 were transferred as agreed, but Helena only received 400,000, and that she'll never know she was scammed." The detective took notes furiously. These numbers coincided exactly with the transfers that the businessman had discovered in the company's records. "Can you describe this man in more detail?" The girl closed her eyes, accessing visual memories with the precision of a camera. Taller than the man in the chair, dark hair combed back. He wore a dark blue suit and shiny black shoes. The watch on his wrist had numbers that glowed green in the dark. And the ring you mentioned? It was golden with a red stone and a drawing of an animal. It looked like the ring that the man in the chair used to wear, but a little different. These descriptions were too specific to be childhood fantasies. The detective knew that he had in his hands the testimony of an exceptional witness, but he also knew that accusing a millionaire executive based mainly on the testimony of a street child would be a monumentally legal challenge. After the interrogation, the girl was taken back to the foster home, but not before asking again when she could see the businessman. "Soon, honey," promised the social worker. "But first, adults need to solve some important things." That same afternoon, the detective decided to act. He obtained a search and seizure warrant for the house and office of the businessman's cousin, based on financial evidence and the girl's testimony. It was a risky move, but the specific details of the child's testimony were too compelling to be ignored. The operation was executed simultaneously in both locations. At the cousin's mansion, the investigators found the watch described by the girl, a Swiss model with green luminescent hands. In the office, they discovered records of bank transfers that confirmed the exact amounts mentioned in the testimony. But the most compromising evidence was found in a password-protected digital vault. Recordings of telephone conversations that the cousin had made as insurance against possible future complications. In one of them, his voice was clearly audible, coordinating details of the kidnapping with the stepmother. "Helena, you understand what your role is, right? You're going to receive your share when everything is over, but if something goes wrong, you're going to take all the blame." What if he survives? He's not going to survive. We're going to make it look like an accidental overdose. The newspapers are going to say it was just another young businessman who couldn't handle the pressure of business. When these recordings reached the detective's hands, the case was transformed from suspicion to concrete evidence. The cousin was arrested the next morning in his luxurious office in front of shocked employees who never suspected that they worked for someone capable of planning a murder. The news of the arrest spread quickly through the corporate world. Shares of the company plummeted on the stock market as investors tried to understand the implications of having a vice president accused of attempted homicide. Assets in Bitcoin and other digital investments also suffered dramatic fluctuations as speculators reacted to the news. The businessman received the call from the detective while he was in his penthouse, looking out the window at the city where everything had begun. "We got him," said the detective's voice over the phone. "We have enough evidence to keep him locked up. Your cousin confessed everything after we showed him the recordings." "And the girl?" "With this evidence, she no longer needs to testify in court. She's been through enough trauma." For the first time in months, the businessman felt he could breathe normally. But he knew that there was still a battle ahead. To regain custody of the girl and rebuild the trust that had been shaken by so many separations and broken promises. That night he called the foster home. "Can I talk to her?" he asked the caregiver. When the girl answered the phone, her small voice carried a mixture of hope and caution. "Are you coming to get me now?" "Tomorrow," he promised. "Tomorrow I'm going to get you, and you'll never have to be away from home again." "Do you really promise this time?" "I promise." "And you know I always keep my promises." But as he made that promise, he knew that he would have to face one last obstacle: convincing the judge that a man with panic disorder and a traumatized child could together form a functional and happy family. The second hearing took place 3 weeks after the cousin's arrest, but the atmosphere in the courtroom was completely different. The news about the family conspiracy had spread through the local newspapers, transforming the businessman from an unstable man trying to adopt a child into a victim who had survived an assassination attempt orchestrated by his own family. The teacher couple was present again, but now they seemed less confident. Their chances of adoption had decreased drastically when it became clear that the girl was not just an abandoned child, but a key witness in a criminal case of significant proportions. "Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case," began the judge, leafing through a pile of documents much thicker than at the previous hearing, "we need to reconsider all aspects of this custody." The businessman's lawyer stood up, clearly more confident this time. "Your Honor, my client was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy that included people close to his family. The minor not only saved him physically, but was also instrumental in discovering the truth. There is between them a bond that goes far beyond the normal circumstances of adoption." The stepmother's lawyer, who'd represented the opposing side at the first hearing, looked visibly uncomfortable. His client had been arrested as an accomplice in the conspiracy, and now he was trying to downplay her involvement in the custody proceedings. "Your Honor," he said hesitantly, "my client formally withdraws any objection to the adoption process. We acknowledge that circumstances have significantly changed." The judge then turned to the couple of teachers. "Do you still maintain an interest in pursuing this process?" The woman exchanged glances with her husband before responding. "Your Honor, we've always wanted to offer a loving home to a child in need, but it's evident that this particular girl has a special connection with the businessman. It would be cruel to separate them after everything they've been through together." Their decision to voluntarily relinquish their claim demonstrated the couple's noble character, but it also made it clear that everyone in the room recognized the unique bond between the businessman and the girl. "I'd like to hear from the minor again," the judge said. The girl entered the room accompanied by the social worker from the juvenile court, wearing the same blue dress as in the previous hearing. But there was something different about her. A less tense posture, eyes that didn't constantly scan the room for threats. The weeks at the foster home, combined with the certainty that the bad men had been arrested, had allowed her to relax for the first time in years. "How are you feeling, dear?" the judge asked. "Better," the girl replied, "because now I know the men who hurt him are locked up and can't hurt anyone anymore." "And you still want to live with him?" "He's my family," she said simply. "Not because someone said he had to be, but because we chose each other." The judge studied some documents before continuing. "I see reports here that you've made significant progress in therapy. Your therapist says you're more open, less reactive to stressful situations. The doctor taught me that not all adults want to hurt me," the girl explained, "and that when someone really chooses you, they don't abandon you just because you get sad or scared sometimes." The businessman felt his eyes fill with tears listening to those words. Throughout all these months, he had worried about not being good enough for her, but she had learned that true love meant accepting mutual imperfections. The judge then addressed the businessman. "Sir, what is the state of your mental health?" "I still have episodes of anxiety," he admitted honestly. "I probably always will. But I've learned to manage them better, and most importantly, I've learned that vulnerability isn't weakness when you have someone who cares about you. And financially, I understand your company went through turbulence after your cousin's arrest. The stock recovered after investors realized the company was more stable without his influence. Our profits from Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have offset the initial losses. I have more than enough resources to provide her with education, medical care, and all the opportunities she deserves." The judge made some notes before reaching her decision. Normally, adoption cases follow established protocols, but this case is extraordinary in every aspect. A child who survived alone on the streets for 2 years, who had enough courage to save a stranger, who became a key witness in solving a serious crime. She paused, looking directly at the businessman and the girl. And a man who, despite his own traumas and limitations, chose to take responsibility for someone who needed him as much as he needed to find purpose for his own healing. The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone waited for the words that would determine the future of this unconventional family. "I grant the adoption petition," the judge announced finally, "with the condition that both of you continue psychological counseling and that semi-annual reports are submitted for the next 2 years." The girl didn't fully understand what had been decided until she saw the businessman kneel in front of her with tears in his eyes. "It means you can come home now," he said. "Forever. Forever for real this time. Forever for real." She threw herself into his arms with a force that almost knocked him over, and for the first time since they met, both cried, not from sadness or fear, but from pure relief. 2 hours later, they were back in the penthouse. The girl immediately ran to her room, checking that all her drawings were still where she had left them, that the blanket still formed the nest in the corner where she felt safe. "Can I change something in the room?" she asked, appearing in the doorway with a crayon in her hand. "You can change whatever you want. It's your room. I want to paint birds on the walls, but not sad black birds, colorful and happy birds. We'll buy paint tomorrow." That night, for the first time in months, both slept peacefully. There were no nightmares about dark sheds or anxiety attacks about forced separations. Just the comfortable silence of a home where two broken people had found a way to heal together. But there was still one last challenge ahead. The company needed to be restructured after the cousins' departure. New executives needed to be hired, and most importantly, the businessman needed to learn to balance the responsibilities of being a father with the demands of running a multi-million-dollar corporation. More importantly still, he needed to teach the girl that family didn't just mean survival and mutual protection, but also growth, joy, and the possibility of dreaming about a future that went beyond simply not being hurt. The true journey of healing was just beginning, but for the first time, both would face the challenges knowing they weren't alone. 6 months after the adoption was finalized, the routine in the penthouse had transformed into something neither of them had thought possible. The businessman woke up every morning at 7, no longer by the automatic alarm that forced him to face corporate meetings, but by the sound of the girl humming softly in the next room while she got ready for school. She had finally agreed to attend in-person classes, but at a smaller, more welcoming school that he had found after much research. The building had only 2 floors, gardens where the children could play freely, and most importantly, teachers specialized in working with students who brought difficult experiences from the past. "Daddy," she said one morning, using for the first time the word he never expected to hear, "can I take cookies for my friends today?" The word friends made him smile. For months, she had refused to interact with other children, preferring to stay alone during recess, watching from a distance the games she didn't understand. But gradually, her resilient nature had found a way to connect with classmates who, like her, carried their own invisible scars. "Of course you can. Let's make chocolate chip cookies." While they prepared the dough together in the kitchen, she told him about a new girl at school who had recently arrived from a shelter. "She stays alone like I used to. I think she's scared like I was." "And what are you going to do?" "I'm going to share my cookies with her. And I'm going to tell her that in the beginning I was scared too, but now I know that some people are safe." The emotional maturity she had developed impressed not only him, but also the therapist who continued to counsel them both weekly. The professional had explained that children who survive extreme trauma sometimes develop an exceptional capacity for empathy, managing to identify and help others who are going through similar situations. That afternoon, after dropping her off at school, the businessman headed to his company. The corporate structure had changed significantly since his cousin's arrest. He had promoted younger executives to leadership positions, implemented more rigorous financial transparency policies, and most importantly, created an investment fund focused on social projects that supported children in vulnerable situations. Profits for the last quarter exceeded expectations, reported his new CFO during the morning meeting. Investments in Bitcoin yielded 40% above projections, and our portfolio of technology stocks is being considered one of the most promising in the market. Great, he replied, but his attention was divided. And how is the progress on the foster home project? Construction should be completed in 3 months. It will be the most modern in the region, with the capacity to house 50 children in conditions that respect their dignity and individuality. It was a personal project he had conceived with the girl. During one of their nightly conversations, when she still had occasional nightmares, she had commented that she wished other street kids had a safe place to sleep. From that simple conversation, he decided to use a significant portion of his wealth to create something that made a real difference. Around 4 in the afternoon, as had become routine, he left the office to pick up the girl from school. It was a habit that his employees found strange at first. A multimillionaire CEO adjusting meeting schedules so he wouldn't miss picking up his daughter. But that was now a natural part of the company's culture. "How was your day?" he asked when she got into the car. "The new girl ate all the cookies," she reported excitedly, "and she said they were the best she'd ever had. I don't think she'd eaten cookies in a long time. Like you before. Yeah, but now I can make cookies whenever I want. And I'm going to teach her too." During the drive home, she told him about her classes, about a science project where she was planting beans in cotton, about a drawing she had made of her family, no longer the dark sheds of the past, but a colorful house with 2 smiling people in front. That night, after dinner, they sat on the penthouse balcony to watch the city traffic below. She had developed the habit of asking questions about the world she was discovering, and he had learned to give answers that a 5-year-old could understand without losing honesty. "Daddy, why did your cousin want to hurt you?" It was a question she asked periodically, trying to understand how people from the same family could betray each other. He had learned not to lie or oversimplify, but also not to burden her with details that would only bring more confusion. "Sometimes people make bad choices because they want things that aren't theirs," he explained. "He wanted to have what was mine, but instead of working to earn his own things, he chose to try to take mine." "But you had shared some things with him, hadn't you?" "I had, but for some people it's never enough." "And Helena, why did she help him?" "Because she was tricked. She thought she was gaining something, but in reality, she was being used." The girl reflected on this for a few moments. "Is that why you always tell me the truth, so I don't get tricked?" "That's one of the reasons, but mainly because you deserve to know the truth, even when it's difficult. I like it when you tell the truth. Even when it makes me sad, I know I can trust you." These conversations became some of the most precious moments for the businessman. Seeing the girl process complex concepts with her childish logic, but also with a wisdom that had been forged through difficult experiences, made him realize that he was learning as much as he was teaching. A week later, during a routine consultation with the therapist, the professional made an observation that surprised him. "You've both changed a lot," she said, reviewing her notes from the past months. "Mr. Owen, your anxiety episodes have decreased significantly. And you, dear," she said to the girl, "are demonstrating levels of confidence and socialization that we didn't expect to see so quickly." "Why is this happening?" he asked. "Because you found purpose in each other. He had financial resources but no emotional meaning to his life. You had survived but had no security or stability. Together, you've created something that neither of you could have achieved alone." The girl, who was playing with colorful blocks while the adults talked, looked up. "It's like the cookies. Flour alone doesn't turn into anything. Chocolate alone doesn't turn into anything. But when you mix it all together and put it in the oven, it turns into something good. The simplicity of the analogy made both the businessman and the therapist laugh, but also recognized the depth of the observation. That night, the businessman received an unexpected call. It was from the detective who had led the kidnapping investigation. "I have news about the case," said the familiar voice on the phone. "Your cousin has decided to make a deal with the prosecution. He's going to confess all the details of the conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence. And does that change anything for us? It means you won't have to testify at the trial. The girl has been through enough trauma. With the full confession, she can move forward without having to relive it all publicly." It was the news he had most hoped to hear. The possibility of her having to testify in detail in a public court had been a dark cloud hanging over their future plans. When he told her the news, her reaction was typical of her practical personality. Does that mean he understood he did something wrong? It means he's going to take responsibility for what he did. That's good. Sometimes people need to learn that bad choices have bad consequences. Once again, her ability to simplify complex concepts impressed him. She had learned a lesson about justice and responsibility that many adults take decades to understand. That night, for the first time since they met, neither of them had nightmares. The past had finally been put in its rightful place as an experience that had shaped them, but no longer as a threat that controlled their present. A year had passed since the end of the trial, and life in the penthouse had found a rhythm that both considered close to perfection. The girl, now 6 years old, attended school with genuine enthusiasm, had a small but loyal group of friends, and had developed an unexpected passion for the electronic keyboard that the businessman had bought after discovering that she hummed complex melodies while playing. On that Saturday morning, they were making breakfast together when she asked a question that caught him completely off guard. "Daddy, have you ever thought about getting married?" He almost dropped the cup of coffee he was pouring. "Why are you asking that?" "Because the teacher at school said that most kids have a mom and a dad, and I was thinking that maybe you'd be less alone if you had a wife." The innocence of the observation touched him deeply. All this time, focused on giving her the stability she deserved, he had completely ignored his own personal life. His days were divided between the company, taking care of her, and the therapeutic consultations that both still maintained. "Do you think I'm alone?" he asked, sitting next to her on the kitchen counter. "Not when I'm here, but when I go to school, you're alone in the big office. And sometimes at night, when you think I'm sleeping, I hear you walking around the house like you're looking for something." Her perception of his nightly habits surprised him. It was true that he had developed the habit of walking around the penthouse on nights when he couldn't sleep, especially on weekends when he didn't have the company routine to occupy his mind. "And if I found someone special, would you be okay with that?" "It would depend on the person," she replied with the straightforward honesty he had learned to expect. "It would have to be someone who liked me too, not just you, and who wouldn't try to change our routine of making cookies and watching movies on Sundays." The conversation was interrupted by the penthouse intercom. It was a delivery person with a package that the businessman wasn't expecting. When he opened it, he found an elegant invitation to a charity gala organized by local businessmen, an event to raise funds for organizations that worked with children in vulnerable situations. "Is it going to be boring?" asked the girl, reading the invitation over his shoulder. "Probably," he admitted, "but it's for an important cause. And who knows, it might be an opportunity to meet new people. New people like a girlfriend. You don't give up easily, do you? I learned from you that when you want something important, you have to work to get it." The following week, the businessman found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, buying clothes for a social occasion. He had hired a trusted babysitter to stay with the girl during the party, a decision that she approved only after interrogating the woman about her knowledge of children's cooking and her patience with questions about how things worked. The party took place at the city's most exclusive country club, an event where the region's most successful businessmen gathered to demonstrate philanthropy and inevitably discuss business. The businessman arrived with some reluctance, still preferring smaller, more controlled environments since his anxiety episodes. It was during the opening cocktail that he met the director of a non-governmental organization that worked specifically with the reintegration of street children. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with brown hair tied in an elegant bun, but eyes that reflected the same determination that he had learned to recognize in people who dedicated their lives to causes greater than themselves. "I heard you're building a foster home," she said, approaching him during a break in the formal introductions. "It's an admirable project." "It's personal," he replied, surprised that she knew about his project. "My daughter went through difficult experiences before coming to live with me." "Adopted?" "Yes. She saved me in more ways than I could explain." The conversation flowed naturally, from technical details about foster home structures to philosophies about how to help traumatized children rebuild trust in the world. She demonstrated deep and practical knowledge about subjects he was only beginning to understand, but without the condescension he would expect from someone with so much experience in the area. "I would like to visit our center when it's ready," she said at the end of the night, "and maybe your daughter would like to meet some of the children we help. Sometimes it's therapeutic for them to talk to someone who has had similar experiences." When he got home, he found the girl still awake, pretending to read a book, but obviously waiting for a detailed report from the party. "Did you meet anyone interesting?" she asked even before he took off his jacket. "I did. A woman who works helping children like you. Like me, how? Children who have gone through difficult times and need to learn to trust people again." The girl processed this information carefully. "And is she pretty?" "She's pretty, yes. But more importantly, she's smart and dedicated to her work. Are you going to see her again?" "Maybe. She suggested that you could meet some of the children she helps." "I would like that," said the girl, surprising him. "I think I could tell them that in the beginning I was scared too, but now I know that some people are safe." 3 weeks later, they visited her organization's center. It was an older building than the project he was building, but there was an atmosphere of warmth and care that impressed him. The walls were covered with drawings made by the children. There were cozy reading nooks, and most importantly, staff who clearly loved what they did. The girl integrated naturally with the other children, sharing stories and demonstrating the same natural empathy that she had developed at school. She didn't talk about the traumatic details of her past, but she managed to convey hope in a way that only someone who had lived similar experiences could do. "She's special," commented the director, watching the girl teach a younger child to draw colorful birds. "She has a natural capacity for emotional leadership. She teaches me new things every day," admitted the businessman. "Sometimes I think I'm the one being raised by her." During the following months, visits to the center became regular. The girl had found a purpose in helping other children, while the businessman and the director developed a friendship that gradually evolved into something deeper. It was during one of those visits that something happened that changed everyone's perspective on the future. One of the children at the center, an 8-year-old boy who had recently arrived from the streets, was having difficulty adapting. He refused to participate in activities, didn't trust any adult, and had tried to run away 3 times. The girl approached him during a particularly difficult afternoon, when he was hiding under a table, refusing to come out. "I know why you're scared," she said, sitting on the floor near the table. "I used to hide when I came to new places, too." "You don't know anything," the boy mumbled. "Yes, I do. I know you're thinking about running away because you think everyone's going to hurt or abandon you. I know you don't sleep well because you listen to all the noises. And I know you don't want to like this place because you're scared of when you have to leave." The silence that followed was heavy. Slowly the boy came out from under the table and looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I used to think the same thing, until I found my daddy." "Your real daddy?" "For real. Not because he made me, but because he chose me. And because I chose him too." At that moment, watching his daughter help another child find hope, Owen realized that he had found not only a family, but also a purpose that went far beyond accumulating wealth or managing multi-million-dollar investments. And when he looked at Marina beside him, he saw in her eyes the same understanding. Sometimes life offers second chances, not only to heal old wounds, but to build something completely new and better than anything that was lost in the past. 2 years had passed since their first visit to the center, and Owen's life had transformed in ways he never could have predicted. His relationship with the director of the organization had evolved from professional admiration into a serious courtship based on shared values and a mutual understanding of the importance of protecting vulnerable children. The girl, now 8 years old, had become a sort of unofficial ambassador of the center, helping new residents to adapt and find confidence. Her natural capacity for empathy and leadership had impressed the professionals so much that they began to include her in special peer mentoring programs. On that Sunday morning, the three were in the penthouse kitchen preparing lunch together. Marina had become a regular presence on weekends, and the girl had accepted her presence with the same seriousness with which she evaluated all the important decisions in her life. "Marina," the girl said, using Marina's first name with a formality that she still sometimes maintained, "can I ask you an important question?" "Of course, honey. If you and Daddy get married, will I have to call you Mum?" The direct question caught both Owen and Marina off guard. They had discussed marriage privately, but didn't know that the girl had perceived the direction of their relationship. "You can call me whatever you feel most comfortable with," Marina replied carefully. "There's no rule about it, because I would like to call you Mom Marina if you let me. That way it's clear that you're my mom, but also that Marina is your real name." The simplicity of the solution deeply touched Marina, who had worried about how to integrate into the family dynamic without disrespecting the unique history that father and daughter shared. "I would be honored if you called me that," she said, feeling her eyes fill with tears. "And if you have babies," continued the girl, demonstrating that she had thought carefully about all the implications, "will I still be special to you?" Owen knelt in front of her, holding her small hands. "You'll always be special to me. You're the one who taught me how to be a father, how to be a better person. Nothing and no one can change that." "And you know that we saved each other, right?" added Marina. "You saved your dad that night, and he saved you from the streets. That's a story that only belongs to you two." 3 months later, the question about marriage was officially answered during a small but significant ceremony on the penthouse balcony. The girl was the flower girl, wearing a dress that she had chosen herself and carrying rings that were designed especially to include small engraved birds, a tribute to the drawings she had made since the early days. "Now we're a real family on paper too," she declared during the small dinner that followed the ceremony. The honeymoon was spent in a mountain cabin, but lasted only 4 days because the girl had made it clear that she didn't like to stay away from home for extended periods. When they returned, they found a special invitation waiting. The foster home that Owen had funded was finally ready to be inaugurated. The inauguration took place on a sunny afternoon, with local authorities, social work professionals, and most importantly, dozens of children who would benefit from the new space. The modern building contrasted with the older buildings in the area, but it had been designed to be welcoming rather than intimidating. "This center," said Owen during his inaugural speech, "exists because a 4-year-old girl had enough courage to help a stranger. She taught me that heroism has no age, and that sometimes we save other people by saving ourselves." The girl was sitting in the front row, next to Marina, watching with pride as he spoke. When it was her turn to cut the inaugural ribbon, she insisted that the three of them do it together, each holding a part of the ceremonial scissors. "So that all the children who are going to live here know that family can be built, not just inherited," she said to the small crowd, demonstrating an eloquence that impressed the adults present. In the following months, the center became a model for other similar initiatives. The integrated approach between social assistance, education, and therapy, based on the family's personal experience, showed exceptional results in the reintegration of children who had lived on the streets. The girl became a regular visitor, not as a beneficiary, but as a living example that it was possible to overcome trauma and build a happy life. Her story spread through articles in newspapers and specialized magazines, always focusing on the importance of giving second chances to both children and adults willing to open their hearts. It was during one of those visits that something happened that tested all the emotional stability that the family had built. One of the center's staff members came running to find Owen with an expression of urgency on his face. "Mr. Owen, there's a situation you need to know about," the man said, breathing heavily. "His stepmother is here. She was released from prison last week and wants to talk to you." Owen felt his heart race, the first signs of an anxiety attack beginning to manifest. Marina immediately noticed his reaction and squeezed his hand, while the girl, with her heightened sensitivity to stressful situations, approached him. "Can she hurt us?" asked the girl, showing that she also remembered the woman who had tried to separate them during the adoption process. "No," Marina replied firmly. "She no longer has legal power over you, but you don't have to talk to her." "I want to talk to her," said the girl, surprising both adults. "Are you sure?" asked Owen. "I am. I want her to see that we're happy, and I want to understand why she did those bad things." The conversation took place in the center's boardroom, with Marina present as a mediator and a security guard discreetly positioned outside. The stepmother had aged visibly during her years in prison, her hair now completely grey and a frailty that hadn't existed before. "I came to apologize," she said, addressing Owen first, "for what I did, for the way I tried to destroy your happiness." "Why did you do it?" asked the girl directly, without mincing words. The stepmother looked at the child who had grown and transformed into a confident and articulate girl. "Because I was jealous. Jealous of the way he managed to be happy when I couldn't, and I thought that if I took away his happiness, I would feel better." "And did you feel better?" "No, I felt worse. And in prison, I learned that the happiness of others doesn't diminish our own. In fact, happy people around us make us happier too." The conversation lasted only 20 minutes, but it was enough to provide a closure that none of them knew they needed. The stepmother left after promising that she wouldn't bother them again, but also after expressing genuine admiration for the family they had built. "She seemed sad," observed the girl as they walked back home. "People who make bad choices often get sad afterwards," Marina explained. "It's part of learning from mistakes. I think she learned. I hope she finds a way to be happy without trying to take away the happiness of others." That night, during dinner in the penthouse that now housed 3 people, Owen reflected on how his life had changed completely. His company continued to thrive. His investments in bitcoins and technology stocks generated profits that allowed him to fund multiple social projects. But more importantly, he had learned that true success wasn't measured only in accumulated wealth. "You know, you're the most important people in my life, don't you?" he said to his wife and daughter. "We know," they replied in unison, and then laughed at the accidental synchronization. "And you know that our story is still being written, don't you? That the best is yet to come." The girl, now mature enough to understand the weight of that promise, smiled with the confidence of someone who had learned that true family was built through daily choices of love, patience, and mutual commitment. "I know," she said, "and I can't wait to see what adventures we're going to live together." 5 years had passed since the wedding, and the girl, now 13 years old, had transformed into a confident teenager who carried her story not as a burden, but as a source of strength and purpose. The penthouse had been expanded to include an office where she did her homework and a small studio where she practiced piano, a talent that had blossomed over the years. On that Saturday morning, the family was gathered in the kitchen, discussing plans for the weekend, when the phone rang. It was the director of the foster home with news that would once again change the dynamics of their lives. "We have a special situation," he said through the speakerphone. "A child arrived last night, a 5-year-old boy who has been living alone on the streets for over a year. He refuses to talk to any adult, but yesterday, when he heard the story of our young ambassador, he specifically asked to meet her." The girl, who was now called the young ambassador of the center due to her regular volunteer work, stopped eating and paid full attention to the conversation. "Does he know my story?" she asked. "Yes, he does. One of the older kids told him how you got here, how you found a family, and how you now help other kids. He said he'll only talk to the girl who saved the rich man." Owen and Marina exchanged glances. Throughout all these years, they had carefully protected the girl's privacy. But her story had become a sort of motivational legend among the children at the center. "Can I see him today?" she asked, already getting up from the table. "Of course you can," Marina replied. "But remember that he may be very scared. It's going to take patience." An hour later, they were at the center where they found the boy hiding under a bed in the adaptation room. He was too small for his 5 years, with disheveled hair and eyes that carried a deep distrust that the girl immediately recognized. "Hi," she said, sitting on the floor near the bed. "My name is Sarah. I heard you wanted to meet me." A pair of big, scared eyes appeared from under the bed, studying her carefully. "Are you the girl who lived on the street?" asked a small, hoarse voice. "I used to be, for 2 years. I know what it's like to be afraid to sleep, what it's like not knowing where you're going to get food, what it's like not trusting anyone. And you have a real family now." "I do, but it took time for me to believe it was real." Gradually, the boy came out from under the bed and sat on the floor near her, keeping enough distance to run if necessary. "How did you know they weren't going to hurt you?" he asked. "At first I didn't know. It took a long time for me to trust. But they were patient with me. They never tried to force me to do anything. And most importantly, they kept all the promises they made." "What kind of promises?" "Simple promises. That I was going to have food every day, that no one was going to hit me, that I could go to school, that they weren't going to abandon me even when I did things wrong." During the next hour, Sarah talked to the boy about fears, hopes, and the possibility that there were safe adults in the world. She didn't lie about the difficulties, didn't promise that it would be easy, but offered something more valuable, the living proof that it was possible to survive and thrive. "Can I tell you a secret?" she said at the end of the conversation. The boy nodded. "Sometimes I still get scared. Scared that something bad will happen to my family, scared that I'm not good enough, scared of being alone again. But I learned that being scared isn't bad, as long as we don't let fear control our life. And how do you not let it? Remembering that I've been through bad things before and survived. And remembering that I have people who love me now, so I'm not fighting alone." When they left the center that afternoon, Sarah was quiet and thoughtful. During the drive home, she finally spoke. "Daddy, Mom, Marina, can I ask you something important?" "Of course," they answered simultaneously. "Have you ever thought about adopting another child?" The question caught both adults off guard. They had discussed the possibility of having biological children, but had never seriously considered a second adoption. "Why are you asking?" questioned Owen. "Because there's a lot of space in our house. And because you're good parents, and mainly because I think that little boy needs a family as much as I did. But wouldn't you be jealous? Wouldn't you feel less special?" asked Marina. "No," Sarah replied with conviction. "Love isn't like money. When you divide it, you don't have less. you have more. That night after Sarah went to sleep, Owen and Marina stayed awake, talking about the possibility. They had more than enough financial resources, experience in dealing with traumatized children, and mainly they had seen how Sarah had flourished with love and stability. "It would be a big change," said Marina. "All the best things in our life came from big changes," he replied. "Sarah turned us into a family. Maybe it's time to give another child the same opportunity." During the following weeks, they visited the boy regularly. Sarah became his bridge to the adult world, translating his needs and fears to the professionals at the center. Gradually, he began to interact with other staff members, to participate in activities, and mainly to demonstrate interest in getting to know Sarah's family better. "Do they live in a house in the clouds?" he asked one day, trying to understand the concept of a penthouse. "It's pretty high up," Sarah laughed, "but it has an elevator, and from my room you can see the ocean." "And do they have other kids?" "Only me. But if you wanted to, maybe you could be my brother." The idea of having a brother seemed both exciting and terrifying to the boy. He had learned on the streets that trusting anyone was dangerous, but the living evidence of Sarah, a girl who had come out of the same streets and now had a safe and happy life, was slowly breaking down his defenses. The boy's adoption process took almost a year, but this time it was different. There was no family opposition, no legal complications, only the normal procedures to ensure that everyone was prepared for the new family dynamic. Sarah actively participated in the entire process, helping to prepare a room for him, choosing toys that might interest him, and mainly serving as his advocate when he had episodes of fear or distrust. "He's going to need time to adapt," she explained to her parents during a family meeting, "just like I did. But if you are patient with him as you were with me, he'll find out that we're a real family." On the day the boy finally came to live with them, Sarah greeted him at the penthouse door wearing a t-shirt that read, "Best Big Sister in the World," a gift that she had specifically requested for the occasion. "Welcome to our home," she said, holding his small hand as they entered together. "Now, you're part of our family too." The boy looked around the luxurious penthouse, then at Sarah, then at Owen and Marina, who watched him with encouraging smiles. "Forever?" he asked with a small voice. "Forever," they all confirmed in unison. That night, during the family dinner, now a family of 4, Owen reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun that terrible night in the shed. A brave child had saved him from his own family's conspiracy, and now he was saving other children through the love and stability they had learned to create together. "You know you're the best thing in my life, don't you?" he said, looking at his wife and his 2 children. "We know," they replied, and this time there were 3 voices in perfect harmony. The family had grown again, and with it, the certainty that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most difficult beginnings, and that true love has the infinite capacity to transform tragedies into triumphs when the right people meet at the right time. 10 years had passed since that night that changed everything. The girl, now 14 years old, was standing on the stage of the city's main auditorium, wearing an elegant blue dress, holding a microphone with the confidence of someone who had learned to transform her experiences into hope for others. "When I was 4 years old," she began, her clear voice echoing through the packed auditorium, "I lived on the streets and thought the world was a place where only bad people existed. Today, at 14 years old, I am here to tell you how one terrible night became the foundation of the most incredible family anyone could dream of." In the front row, Owen, now 40 years old, watched with pride as his daughter told her story to an audience of businessmen, social workers, and local authorities gathered for the 10th anniversary of the foster home he had founded. Beside him were Marina, who had become the director of a network of centers throughout the region, and the boy, now 15 years old, who had developed into an articulate and confident young man. "The story I'm going to tell today is not just about me," she continued. It's about how a technology company turned into a force for social change, how a traumatized man found purpose through fatherhood, and how a street child discovered that family isn't about blood, but about daily choices of love and commitment. During the years that followed the second adoption, Owen's company had become one of the largest in the country in its segment. His investments in bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies had multiplied exponentially, creating a wealth that allowed him to fund dozens of social projects. But more important than financial growth had been the transformation of his corporate mission. "My dad," said the girl, gesturing in his direction, "always says that true success isn't measured only by the numbers in the bank account, but by the number of lives you manage to touch positively. Today, our family directly supports 43 foster homes across the country, providing temporary homes and permanent families for more than 1,000 children a year." The audience applauded, but she continued, her voice carrying the passion she had inherited from her adoptive parents. "But this isn't a story about charity or philanthropy. It's a story about how trauma can be transformed into purpose, about how broken people can heal together, and about how a family can grow not only in number, but in the capacity to love." She paused, looking directly at her younger brother, who smiled and nodded discreetly. "My brother came to our family when I was 8 years old, and he was 5. He was as scared as I had been, but this time I could be the person who showed him that there are safe adults in the world. Teaching someone to trust again taught me that sometimes we heal ourselves by helping others to heal." In the years that followed, both children had found their own ways to contribute to the family mission. The girl had become a motivational speaker, telling her story at schools and conferences to inspire other children in difficult situations. The boy had developed an interest in architecture, designing spaces specifically designed for traumatized children. "Today I want to announce our next project," she said, her voice growing in emotion. "In partnership with local universities, we will launch a scholarship program for young people who have left the foster home system. Because we believe that every child deserves not only a safe home, but also the opportunity to dream as high as their courage allows." The audience rose in a prolonged ovation. Owen felt tears welling up in his eyes, not from sadness, but from a happiness so profound it felt surreal. The girl he had found, traumatized and distrustful, had transformed into an inspirational leader, using her own experience to pave the way for others. After the speech, during the reception that followed, several people approached the family to express admiration and gratitude. Among them was a young couple who had just adopted a child through one of the centers supported by the foundation. "Your story gave us the courage to take this step," the woman told Sarah. "When we learned that you had built such a beautiful family, we decided we also wanted to be part of this network of love." "And how's it going?" asked Marina, always interested in the practical details of adaptation. "Difficult," admitted the man. "She still doesn't trust completely, still has nightmares, still constantly tests whether we're going to abandon her." "That's normal," said the boy, joining the conversation. "I did the same thing. It took me almost 2 years to believe I was really safe." "And what helped you persist?" asked the woman. "Remembering that love is a daily decision, not a feeling," Sarah replied. "Some days it's easy, some days it's hard, but every day you choose to stay and fight for that person." Later that night, the family was gathered on the penthouse balcony, watching the city lights stretch to the horizon. It was a ritual they had maintained over the years, quiet moments where they could reflect on the day and plan for the future. "Do you know what I'm most proud of?" Owen said, looking at his 2 children. "What?" they asked simultaneously. "Of how you found ways to transform your own pain into tools to help others. You didn't get stuck in the past. You didn't become permanent victims. You became warriors of hope." "We learned from you," Sarah said. You could have been traumatized forever after the kidnapping. Instead, you chose to adopt me and build a new life. We saved each other," he corrected. "And we continue to save each other every day." Marina, who had remained quiet during the conversation, finally spoke. "There's something you need to know. Today, the final approvals arrived for our most ambitious project." Everyone turned to her, curious. "We're going to open a university specializing in training professionals to work with children in vulnerable situations. It will be the first in the country specifically focused on this area." "And where will it operate?" asked the boy. "Right here, in our city, on a campus that's already being designed by your brother," she smiled. "And that will be inaugurated with a lecture by your sister." The silence that followed was filled by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. From an individual tragedy, they had built a network of hope that now spread throughout the country. "Do you know what this means?" said Sarah, her eyes shining with emotion. "It means that our story will continue multiplying through all the people we train, all the children they help, all the families that will form. Like the birds you drew when you were little," Owen observed. "They started black and sad, but turned into colorful flocks flying free." That night, as the family finally retired to sleep, Owen paused for a moment at Sarah's bedroom door, watching her organize some papers on her desk. She had grown and become a confident young woman, but he could still see traces of the frightened child he had found that night 10 years ago. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Have you ever regretted it? For shouting that night? For saving me? For coming to live with me?" She stopped what she was doing and looked at him with those same big eyes that had captivated him since their first meeting. "Daddy, that was the most important night of my life. Not because I saved you, but because I discovered that I was capable of saving someone. It was when I learned that even being small and scared, I had the power to make a difference. And today I know that that night wasn't the end of a sad story. It was the beginning of an incredible story that is still being written, and I can't wait to see how many other lives we're going to touch together." When he closed the door and headed to his own room, Owen reflected on the extraordinary journey they had traveled. From an attempted murder orchestrated by his own family, they had built a family based on genuine love. From trauma and fear, they had created hope and purpose. From two broken people, they had become a force for social transformation. And as he fell asleep next to Marina, with the soft sound of his children talking quietly in the next room, he knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most beautiful endings really come from the most difficult beginnings, and that true love has the power not only to heal old wounds, but to transform them into sources of strength to help others find their own path to happiness. The story that had begun with cries of despair in an abandoned shed had transformed into a symphony of hope that would continue echoing through generations, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of a brighter tomorrow for those who have enough courage to reach out and save each other. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring everyday videos that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.